Let's pivot now to the Arizona Cardinals. Steve Wilks was the head coach of the team for one season. His claim is that he was a bridge coach. And the notion that was crafted in the original Brian Flores lawsuit was that some black coaches find themselves in a spot where they basically were selected to be a short-term coach, knowing on the way in the David Culley phenomenon. Because we all kind of believe after the fact that the Texans hired David Culley with the goal of quickly firing David Culley and then hiring the person they really wanted to be the coach of the team, which I believe was Josh McCown. And I believe they would have hired Josh McCown, but for the Brian Flores lawsuit. I digress. Steve Wilks, allegedly a bridge coach for the Arizona Cardinals in 2018. This one, to me, is fascinating, Peter, not because of what we already know, but because of what we may learn, again, if it plays out in an open court system and not in the NFL's rigged kangaroo court. Because one of the most compelling facts in all of this is the comparison of the treatment of Steve Wilks and Steve Keim, the two Steves. Steve Keim, 2018, DUI conviction, suspension that overlapped with training camp. And on the surface, Wilks' argument is, I was basically operating with one hand tied behind my back. I don't have a general manager. Why are you holding me to this high standard and firing me at the end of the year and not Steve Keim, who's the one that created this mess? Keim had 1 year left on his contract. Wilks had 3. It would have been cheaper to just fire Keim and hire a new GM. At a deeper level, we're going to see an aggressive attempt to prove, and you've already seen the hints of it in the lawsuit, that Steve Keim's suspension was not honored by Michael Bidwell, the owner of the Arizona Cardinals, that there was communication and involvement by Steve Keim, maybe every single day in training camp, that even though he was suspended, he was still performing the job. He was still involved. That is not quite the Stephen Ross $100,000 per loss offer, but it does delve into something different than the discriminatory aspects of this lawsuit. This is, did an NFL franchise comply with the suspension that was levied upon the team's general manager, or was there some effort to circumvent it? That is going to be a fascinating wrinkle to all of this, and another reason why we can only hope that it plays out publicly so we can all find out what happened, instead of it all happening secretly and we have no access to how any of it plays out.
You know, I think the difficulty that Wilks is going to have in this particular case is that, you know, whereas Wilks got this job and was the head coach for one unsuccessful season, Keim had been with the organization for 19 years at that point. He'd been the general manager for 5 years. And early on in his general manager duties, he made a trade, which turned out to be a great trade, of a 7th-round draft pick for Carson Palmer. I think it was a 7th-round draft pick for Carson Palmer. And a year after that trade, or a little more than a year, the Arizona Cardinals are in the NFC Championship game. So I think what Steve Keim and what Michael Bidwell will claim is that Keim had some currency in the bank with us after 5 years being general manager, knowing we might need to rebuild in the future, or you know, whatever we would do. We trust Keim based on his history and his resume and his 19 years working for the team. We trust that he's going to be able to do it. Now, you can always make the claim that anybody who gets a, what is the severe DUI called, whatever it's called, the excessive DUI, you know, when you're more than twice
extreme,
the level, extreme DUI, yeah, because that's what he got. You could easily make the argument that that should disqualify you from working for wherever you work. And I get it. And if that's going to be your case, then so be it. But the fact is, Keim was able to retain his job. And I think what the Cardinals will claim is that the two things that Wilks claims, one is that he encouraged them to trade up and to try to get Josh Allen at quarterback. And instead, they traded up and got Josh Rosen at quarterback, and what a disaster that was. And look, obviously, we can all see that was getting Josh Rosen was a bad call by them. But any legal person is going to say, well, Mr. Wilks, you're not the general manager of the team. And, you can't, you have no, you basically have no standing to tell them who to trade and everything. It's not your job. It's the general manager's job. And if he screwed it up, that's the way life goes. But I do think the one part of this that the suit does bring into play is how often a black head coach basically has been a bridge coach, fired after 1 year when it was a debacle anyway. David Culley could bring up the same thing with the Houston Texans.
The Steve Keim arrest happened July 4, 2018. Blood alcohol concentration of 0.19%. Extreme DUI kicks in above 0.15. The legal limit in every state is 0.08%. There was a 5-week suspension and a $200,000 fine announced by the Cardinals, but the league was involved in that. And this is one of those, Peter, where you've got the lawsuit, you've got the claims in the lawsuit, you've got circumstances connected to the underlying facts that can create chaos for the organization. That's what's fascinating about this, that in defending against Steve Wilks' lawsuit, the Cardinals will have to deal with this collateral issue of whether and to what extent the terms of the suspension were violated by the organization in order to try to get business done. There's also a little element of the tanking in one of the allegations from Steve Wilks, even though he's not making anything close to the kinds of claims for now that Brian Flores is making. The idea that Steve Keim and Michael Bidwell were upset after the team had a late season victory over the Green Bay Packers because they coveted that first overall pick in the draft. Once they knew they were done, they didn't want to win games. Now, remember, when Brian Flores first filed his lawsuit, there was no specific claim tied to that allegation. It was just dropped out there without any legal theory. Now the legal theory has been added. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's possible Steve Wilks could, at some point down the road, amend his complaint to argue some sort of whistleblower violation or some sort of public policy violation that resulted from the Cardinals wanting him to lose, Wilks refusing to lose, even though they ultimately lost enough games to get the first overall pick, but that being a factor in the final decision-making process by the Cardinals to say, we're done with this guy. He doesn't play ball the way we want him to play ball. He doesn't do what we want him to do. And some would argue Steve Keim has lasted as long as he has in the Cardinals organization because he knows when to do what the boss wants him to do. And Wilks arguably didn't do what the boss wanted him to do, and he was only a one-year employee of the team, Peter.
I mean, look, there are going to be all kinds of charges and counter charges. And when Wilks left, I remember the sort of I don't want to say the drumbeat, but the Cardinals' claim at the time when he left is that basically either we weren't making the progress we thought we were, or we should have been. We wanted a different style of coach, whatever was said afterwards. It's what you say to justify a decision that looks absolutely terrible. And so the Cardinals now are probably going to have to, if this ever were an open court and Michael Bidwell gets up or Steve Keim gets up, why did you fire, Steve Wilks after 1 year? It'll be very interesting to see what their justification is, keeping in mind that their quarterback, Josh Allen, has basically now, I think, been with 4 or 5 teams, and he's had an opportunity to rebuild his career and even be just a quality backup. And he can't even stay on a team because of that, as that job. And so I think Wilks would have a real interesting case here in saying that, Vince Lombardi or Bill Walsh couldn't have succeeded in this job.
I got one for you. I got a Who Said It. I think we played that game yesterday, Sims and me, draft edition. Here's a Who Said It late 2018 edition. We all would want him back. I love Steve Wilks. Great dude. We play hard for him. That's the team, not just me speaking on it. Who said it?
Chandler Jones.
Larry Fitzgerald. Even better.
Wow. That's good.
Yeah. So, good luck, Arizona Cardinals.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.